time. Okay, so the very long title is The 9 Lives of Bleichenbacher's Cat, New Cache Attacks on TLS Implementation. This is a joint work together with Robert Gilliam and Eyal Ronen from Adelaide University, Daniel Genkin from Michigan, David Wang from currently from I don't know where he is right now, but he is somewhere different, and Adi Shamil from the Weizmann Institute. Okay, so I'll try to make it work. Yeah, okay. So the outline of the talk basically will be a very short background, a little bit about how attacking TLS and downgrade attacks, what is the RSA padding attack that we have, and how do we parallelize it using CVP, which we'll explain shortly, and some short conclusions. Okay, so TLS, I'm not sure it really needs an introduction in this form, but it's currently the most widely used cryptographic protocol. It provides communication security for HTTPS, VPN, and many other usages. It has two main parts. The first one is the TLS handshake. TLS handshake is the part that does the party authentication and the secure key exchange. So it will help us verify that we are communicating with Gmail and not with some other provider, and create a secure key exchange for this specific session for us to encrypt, for example, all of these cat videos on YouTube. The other main part is the TLS record layer, and this does the actual encryption. After we have this symmetric key from the TLS handshake, we use it to encrypt the data. It supports what we call cryptographic agility. Basically means that we have many different cipher suites, and we can try to choose new and better ones, and in theory we can also deprecate all the vulnerable ones, and in many other areas, in theory, in practice, theory doesn't really work, as we will see. So if we look at schematically, we have TCP. The record protocol is what uses TCP to transfer the information, encrypted information, and we have the different usages, and we're going to focus on the handshake protocol. Okay, so now we'll talk about a specific cipher suite, and it's called the RSA Key Exchange in TLS. It uses what we call, and we'll explain shortly, the PKCS #1 version 1.5 padding scheme, and it was once the most popular TLS key exchange option. Practically 100% of TLS connection were using it. However, it has a very, very long history of practical implementation attacks, and it's so long that I won't have time to actually go into all of the different attacks, but believe me, this is something that has very, very bad history. And moreover, it doesn't support fault secrecy, which is something that we really like to have, especially in the post-Snowden era. So people probably shouldn't use it right now. However, it is still widely used today. About 6% of all TLS connections are still using it. And we know that there are better alternatives for it. For example, a thermal ECTP-Hellman. However, it's still supported by almost all of the servers and all of the clients for backward compatibility. Actually, the TLS 1.1 and 1.2 standards enforce that this cipher suite will be supported. Okay, so what we did in our paper is try to look at 9 different implementations, and we tested them for vulnerability for different types of cache attacks on the RSA padding scheme. From all the 9 implementations that we checked, only 2, boring SSL and big SSL, were not vulnerable. It's probably a good idea to start your TLS implementation name with a B. It makes it much safer. And we have this nice table that shows all of the different other implementations and the different vulnerabilities. And what we have is basically, in the paper we show that there are 3 different parts in the code that might be vulnerable, and there are different type of oracles that can arise from it, and this is the different vulnerabilities for the different implementations. Okay, so let's assume that you currently believe me and say that I'm able to break these implementations. So basically what we have is we can break 6% of the internet connections. You could say, so what? It's not such a high number. It's probably only older machines that are using it. So what about our new browsers that support newer protocols? So what we actually show is it is feasible to do a man-in-the-middle downgrade attack and to cause browsers to use this older handshake, and using a novel parallelization technique for the RSA padding oracle, we're able to assuming that we have possible cache attacks against several TLS servers. For example, if we have several servers for Facebook or Gmail in different regions in the world to have better latency and higher bandwidth, then we use several different servers, parallelize our attack, and use what you call a beast attack that we'll explain shortly to boost our success probability. So combining all of this, we're able to actually take 100% of the connections that use these vulnerable implementations. Okay, so I feel that most of you probably know what is RSA encryption. Basically, we have RSA modulus, which is the product of two prime numbers. We have the private key D, which is the inverse of the public exponent. And what we do to encrypt is take a number, raise it to the power of E, and we have the ciphertext. And only the server that knows the private key can inverse this operation and retrieve the plain text. So this is relatively simple and nice mathematics. However, when we try to use it on real data, it becomes a little bit more complex. And there are several real-world problems that we need to solve before we actually use RSA encryption in practice. So I will give you several examples. So let's assume that we have a relatively small exponent 3. This is very efficient because the encryption is very fast. And now we want to encrypt a small number like 1000. And we have a large modulus because we want to be safe. So let's say that our public key is about 2048 bits long. So what we have here is that when we exponent 1000, we still get a number that's smaller than the modulus. And taking logarithm over the reals is relatively easy. So we can just break it. So before we encrypt the number, we need to make sure that it is large enough so it will pass the modulus. Okay, so now we have another problem. Let's assume that we take care of this, but we want to encrypt a yes or no answer, just 0 or 1. And this is a bit problematic because it is vulnerable to dictionary attacks. It's very easy to see that we repeat the same plain text and get the same ciphertext. So we need to make sure that when we encrypt a number, the resulting ciphertext is also random. Okay, so how do we do it? We use padding schemes. And this is probably the most used padding scheme standard in the world today, this for RSA. And it's used to pad and encrypt plain text. So what it simply does is pad the plain text up to the RSA modulus link and add some kind of randomization. So let's see this example for how this is used for RSA Key Exchange in TLS 1.2. So the first thing that we have is we have what is called the encryption preamble. This is 2 bytes that just tell anyone that sees this was something that was used for encryption. There is different preamble for signature and probably some other for different usage. Afterward, we have the non-zero padding, which is at least 8 bytes of some random non-zero data. Then we have the zero delimiter. This is the way that we can know what is the size of the plain text. We simply search the message until we find the first 0. And afterwards, we have in TLS the 48 bytes of the pre-master secret key, and it has a specific TLS structure. Okay, so what is this Bleichenbacher's attack that we're referring to? In 1998, Bleichenbacher showed an adaptive chosen ciphertext attack, and it actually exploits the way that the padding is checked after decryption. So if we want to see it in a very schematic form, we have the client, and it encrypts his key, send it as a ciphertext to the server. We have our malicious attacker, and he eavesdrops to the ciphertext and saves it. And then what he does is use this server as an oracle. And the oracle is able to answer the simple question: does the ciphertext that the malicious attacker sends starts with the 0 and 2 bytes, as it's supposed to do in the padding scheme, or not? This is all of the information that we get. And using this valid-invalid answer, we can adaptively choose another ciphertext, send it, and in the end of the process, we're going to decrypt the message. And there is a similar attack to a neural padding scheme by Manger, and it uses very similar ideas. So to basically understand the Bleichenbacher attack, we need to understand a little bit of math. This, I think, is a very beautiful paper, but we won't have time to read it here. I recommend everybody to read it. But what we actually need to know is that at first it was referred to as the million message attack. Basically means that we need a million messages in order to decrypt a single ciphertext. But in general, this number is actually depends specifically on the oracle properties that we have and a little bit on luck, as we will see. So what we need to know for this attack, basically that our attack is adaptive chosen ciphertext, which means until we hear the answer from the oracle, we can't send the new ciphertext for the next round of the attack. And in order to decrypt 2048 bits of RSA encryption, no matter what oracle we have and how lucky we get, we need at least 2048 sequential oracle queries. Okay, so what we want to get in our attack, and this is something that's very common for TLS attacks, we want to get cookies. Basically, we don't really care about breaking all of the TLS connections, because usually when you try to connect to a server, you don't enter your password in each time. And the first time that you connect, you enter the password, and then the server will send you a random number, which is called a cookie. It is stored by your browser, and then when the browser sends this to the server knows that you are connected. And this cookie is sent in the beginning of each TLS connection and allows you to log in without putting your password. And basically the idea is that when we get this cookie, we don't need anything else. We just use this cookie to connect to your Gmail account and just take all of the emails straight off the server. We don't need to actually break your encryption. Okay, so what is the attack scenario for RSA Key Exchange? We can sniff TLS handshake and also the first message that is encrypted. And we use the Bleichenbacher attack to decrypt the pre-mastered secret, decrypt the first message, and then we have cookies, which is very nice. Okay, so how do we do it when we want to also use cache-time side channels? Because we said the way that we can get this oracle now is by using cache attacks. So let's assume that we have a cloud provider, which is very good, very secure, and we have some bank that hosted his HTTPS server over a virtual machine in this cloud. And we have Mr. Smiley here. Mr. Smiley wants to connect to the TLS server. So he tries to log in, he will send the cookie, and the cookie monster will sniff the traffic. Afterwards, the cookie monster is going to do the Bleichenbacher attack, try to get the oracle, and it will use our cache attacker that runs on a VM on the same hardware to get the cache side channel and give us the oracle, is the beginning of the message valid or not. And then using the side channel, we can get cookies, which is what we want. So that's nice. However, we are very greedy and we want all of the cookies. As I mentioned before, only 6% of the users actually use RSA Key Exchange, so we can't get a lot of the cookies. And so what we want to do is we want to use this RSA Key Exchange for downgrade attack. And basically, the only thing that is required is that the server will support the RSA Key Exchange. We don't even care if the client supports it or not. And it also works on TLS 1.3, which is the latest version. This was shown already in 2015. This is currently the only way that is known how to do a downgrade attack on TLS 1.3. And however, it requires an active man-in-the-middle attack. So the question is, do we get the cookie in this way? And the answer is, unfortunately, not yet. And this is because the TLS handshake has a timeout. So we only have 30 seconds in order to try to to do the entire decryption. And if we need to send a lot of messages, and this is again a sequential attack, then we simply can't actually do it in the required 30 seconds. Okay, however, we have a nice browser which is called Firefox. And in Firefox we have a way to prevent the TLS handshake to have a timeout. This is used TLS warning alerts, and it was already shown in the long-chain papers in 2015. For some reason it was not fixed. I think that currently they have fixed it after this paper. At least I hope so. So now we can do a man-in-the-middle downgrade attack. We keep the session alive using this padding, during the padding attack, and then we finish the TLS handshake, decrypt the pre-master secret, and we have the cookie. So are we good yet? Probably not. And the reason that even if the attack is relatively fast, about 10 minutes or so, the user is going to notice that he is trying to access his bank account, and it takes more than 10 minutes for the bank account to load. So this is something that's not really practical. Okay, so here we have the beast attack to the rescue. The beast attack is relatively well known in all the tech. It has one of the coolest paper names that I ever heard. The original paper is called Here Come the XOR Ninjas. And it's a very good reading material. And what it basically says is that we can use JavaScript in the browser to repeatedly reopen connections in the background. Basically, any JavaScript that runs on your browser has the permissions to try to open a connection to any server in the world. And if you have the cookies, it will also send the cookies under TLS and connect to it. It doesn't have the permissions to read anything. So I can use the JavaScript to try to open a handshake into your bank account. I can't read any details from your bank account, but I can cause you to do it. And you don't even know it runs in the background. And because in the start of each connection, the same session cookie is sent in the first package, we need to break just one connection. So we can try it multiple times, and it doesn't really matter, we need to just break one. So we can get the cookie. So how this more advanced attack scenario looks like? We still have the same bank server, we still have Mr. Smiley, now he uses Firefox. He's going to access his bank server, and unfortunately he sees that he has no money in his bank account. So what he can do right now is try to go and look for how to win big prizes in the internet. As we all know, all of this type of websites are scams, and they have malicious people behind them. So here we have our Cookie Monster. What Cookie Monster does is sends JavaScript to the browser of Mr. Smiley, and he starts to open those TLS handshakes in the background, while Mr. Smiley tries to win the lottery. We also use our cache attacker, and we get the search channels, and in the end, we get the cookie. So this is really nice, and we can attack Firefox. However, we are still greedy. We want to have all of the cookies, including the cookies from Chrome, and if someone still uses Internet Explorer or Edge, so they also deserve to suffer a little bit. So in most browsers, we only have 30 seconds of TLS handshake before it times out. So the one problem is that the expected number of queries that we have is really, really high. However, with a very relatively low probability, we can get really lucky and be able to finish the attack with a much smaller number of queries. And this is where the beast attack comes in handy, because we can try to repeatedly reopen the TLS connection, try to do it again and again until we get lucky and able to attack it with very low number. So let's say we need to break just 1 out of 1,000, we can get something that's much smaller than the expected number of queries. So is it enough to get the cookies? And unfortunately, again, the answer is no. And the reason is that no matter how lucky we get, we need at least 2,048 sequential queries, and we have time for just about 600 or so. So here we need to find a way how to parallelize this downgrade attack. And the fact is that many companies reuse the same certificate across multiple servers. So again, let's say that I want to support people both in Europe and in the US. So I have like an AWS server. I put one server in a region in America, one region in Germany, and I will probably reuse the same certificate because it's easier for me and it solves some problems. And everybody knows that we shouldn't reuse keys, but everybody are still doing it anyway. So if we have this scenario, we can actually parallelize our attack across those multiple servers. And we can use each server as a separate oracle. And there are a lot of talks also in previous work how we can parallelize this attack and make it much, much faster. So is it enough to get the cookies? And again, the answer is no, because we still need the attack to be sequential. So no matter how many servers we can use for parallelization, we still need to have this. We can't do more than 600 sequential attacks. Okay, so here we start the a little bit scary lattice part. However, in the end of it, we'll get cookies, so I think it will be worth it. So we'll have a little bit of a mathematical background. We'll look at the Manger oracle because it's a little bit simpler to explain. And the Manger oracle is a relatively simple one. It looks at the plaintext after decryption, and it checks if the most significant byte is 0, it will return 1, otherwise it will return 0. This is the entire oracle. So how is it used to actually attack ciphertext? We start with what we call a blinding phase. In the blinding phase, we simply try to blind a ciphertext by multiplying it with different random s values, and we use s to the power of e. And due to the homomorphic properties of RSA, it basically says that our plaintext will be m times s. And we do it until we find such a random s where we get 1 out of the oracle. If we get 1, then we know that for sure m times s is smaller than the 2 to the log 2 to n minus 8, which basically means that the topmost byte is 0. And when we continue the attack in a sequential manner, what we get, the information we get over time is very similar, but it's a little bit different. Now it says that m times s is inside a specific range, which gets smaller and smaller as the attack continues. So at after I sequential queries, what we have is that we have some value ri, which is equals to m times s, which we don't know, minus ai, which is the beginning of the range. This we do know. This is smaller than the number of bits inside this range. And this basically gives us the knowledge that this number is relatively small. And now what we can do is basically we can run this attack in parallel and get this information from many servers. And then what we basically have is we can translate this to the closest vector problem inside the lattice. And this is something that we know how to solve. We embed this a little bit more complex problem in the simpler and shortest vector problem inside the lattice. And we have a relatively simple algorithm called LLL, which is able to solve this. This is how the lattice looks like. And fortunately for us, we also have a very relatively small lattice because we don't need a lot of parallelization. So this is really, really efficient. And we only need 5 servers in order to break 2048 bits RSA. And this gives us the cookie. So to recap, we have the same attack that we have seen before, but now we have multiple servers around the world that we can use. We put all of the information inside the lattice, and we get the cookies. And that is it. So to recap our results, we have a new technique that I didn't have time to go into, to use microarchitectural pending oracle attacks that can attack 7 out of 9 different implementations that we see. We actually have a proof of concept for both the Manger and Bleichenbacher oracle type of attacks on different implementations. We can boost the efficiency of our attack using the beast attack, and we use parallelization in order to do a downgrade attack and actually be able to attack all of the different users. And we have a proof of concept for this lattice attack based on the Manger oracle. So we get all of the cookies in the world. We did a very long and hard disclosure process. All of the different vendors did patch their code with different levels of success. There are quite a lot of stories about this disclosure process, but I won't be able to get into it. And we have several recommendations. But the bottom line is simply don't use RSA Key Exchange. It has failed us multiple times already. If you really, really must, then please separate your certificate. There are multiple ways to do it, which makes everything much safer. There are other implementation possibilities, but basically, please stop Bleichenbacher yourself. And conclusion, mitigation, when you implement a code, you can mitigate those attacks on RSA. It is not impossible, but it's very, very close to impossible. And if you want more details, you can go to the paper website at this address. And do you have any questions? Okay.